Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. It's our biweekly conversation with which AARP staff and volunteers talk to Connecticut decision makers about policies and programs that are of interest to older residents. My name is John Erlingheuser, and I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Community Outreach here at AARP Connecticut. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome State Representative Jonathan Steinberg of the 136th District. He is also the co-chair of the Legislature's Energy and Technology Committee, also serves on the Public Health Committee as well as the Transportation Committee. Representative Steinberg, welcome, and we were hoping you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, maybe outside of the legislature, what towns you represent, and anything else you think it might be important for our viewers to know about yourself.
Well, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be joining you today. I'm in my seventh term representing the town of Westport. I have about 85% of the community at this point. Never thought I'd last that long. I formerly was on Westport's representative town meeting for a good number of years, spent 3 years as the deputy moderator there. I've been involved with representing Westport in some fashion or another for going on 20 years. My background is healthcare marketing. I worked for some Fortune 100 companies on the product side in New York City, and then ultimately on the services side for big organizations like Mount Sinai Medical Center and the Jewish home care system. I've been a Connecticut boy for most of my life. I grew up in Westport, went to Yale, spent a little time in New York City, sowing wild oats and learning a few things. And I've been back in Westport since 1996.
Well, that's awesome. And, that leads us kind of into our next question. I remember when you first came up to the legislature, and when you came up, you were on the Energy and Technology Committee, which is a committee that AARP does a lot of work on, advocating for ratepayers and such, as do you. And now, after chairing several other committees, you're now co-chair of the Energy and Technology Committee. So why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about what the role of the chair of the Energy and Technology Committee does, what the committee is all about, and what legislative proposals that you have jurisdiction over when it comes to energy and technology?
Well, you're right, John. You and I have been allied since I first came into the legislature a dozen years ago. I remember talking a lot about POTS lines, plain old telephone
Yes,
service,
sir.
and how we've been trying to preserve certain basic functions that we view as necessities that particularly impact seniors. Chairing committee is, I think, one of the highlights of being a legislator. As you're aware, I served as co-chair of the Public Health Committee for 6 years during the pandemic, passing the bill to eliminate vaccine exemptions for religious reasons. And I've long sought, frankly, the chairmanship of the Energy Committee because I am truly passionate about the subject. When I came up, I was a rarity among new legislators. Most people run away as fast as they can from energy and technology. It's a really complicated committee. A lot of very technical information, heavily lobbied, and it's up to the chair to be a discerning leader in figuring out what you want to tackle. Energy and technology, as the title suggests, has purview over everything related to energy policy. We work very closely with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and the Public Utility Regulatory Authority to work on sort of a three-legged stool, trying to look out for policy and protecting consumers. But we also have purview over technology, which has to do with telecom. We spend a lot of time talking about that, as well as other emerging technologies. It's often a little bit forgotten that we handle that piece of the puzzle, but I submit that it's as a critical bit of infrastructure as electricity, water, transportation, housing, you name it.
Absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, several years ago, we honored your work in the telecom field here at AARP for your representation on the behalf of consumers, and we really appreciate that. So, while we're on the subject of energy, I mean, I think the white elephant in the room is that, this past January, residents of both the United Illuminating Service territories and the Eversource territories had their standard service rates for electricity supply skyrocket. And so we're wondering, you're one of our experts on this issue. So what are some of the reasons as to why, that happened? And what are some of the ways that the legislature is doing to try to see if they could mitigate that?
I sought the chairmanship of Energy and Technology knowing full well that the spike was imminent, and a lot of people would have run away from that at that point in time. I think as frustrating as it is, and we'll talk a little bit about it, how little we've been able to do in the short term to really create long-term relief for ratepayers. It has been a really important moment because it's captured the attention, finally, in some cases, of all citizens of Connecticut, that we have an energy policy that needs to be more aggressive, in my view, to accelerate this transition from fossil fuels and all the attendant healthcare and pollution related factors to a new renewable future. And that's going to be harder than perhaps some of us thought. Some thought we'd just snap our fingers and electric rates would come down and we'd all be able to run our electric vehicles and heat pumps and the like. It's going to take longer than that. And I think what's transpired, this extremely anomalous, extraordinary circumstance brought on by supply chain issues, by the war in Ukraine and the like, made us realize how fragile, how tenuous our energy situation here is in New England. The main reason behind why we had this spike was really a matter of timing. It was, we require the utilities who don't actually generate electricity, but they purchase it on behalf of citizens to acquire energy at certain times of the year, and they were obliged to buy in an upmarket just at near the height, and it came down soon after they had made the purchase. But it's at that juncture in which that purchase price drives the rates for consumers. We had been very lucky almost for 20 years with rates staying pretty low. Everything was pegged to natural gas. But when natural gas spiked, thanks to the war and other factors, suddenly we were left with a circumstance where a lot of consumers were in a very bad situation with utility bills that have as much as doubled for some people. And when you're still struggling post-recession, if you have issues with paying for heat and shelter and food and medication, you don't want to have to be making these hard choices. And we know that particularly seniors are affected because they're on fixed incomes. They don't have the flexibility to pay such a significant increase in their energy bills. And nobody wants to put them in a situation where they're choosing between that and food or medication.
Absolutely. And I always like to point out, we call things as we see them here at AARP. And, in fairness to the two utilities, Eversource and United Illuminating, they're not 100, they're not completely indemnified from the increase, but certainly they're not responsible. They make no profit off of standard service. So, there are other areas where they drive the costs up, and I know you're doing some work to address that. So, circumstances happen, and unfortunately that's the position we found ourselves in. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing on the committee to try to mitigate that. Now, having said that, so, what are some of the various ways that ratepayers can pursue on their own, to kind of contain the cost of their electric bills in general? There's a lot of different things that there are out there that can help mitigate high costs. And I know you're one of the leaders on some of these things that are out there. So what would you say that folks can do to try to mitigate?
Well, first of all, I know everybody's frustrated. They thought that perhaps the legislature could step in and snap our fingers and rates would come down. I mean, I guess the good news is we're only about 2.5 months from a new rate change, and everything indicates the rates will come down significantly as of July 1, and people can hopefully see some relief then. Because we will still have a hot summer, likely, where you need to use your air conditioning. There was limited things that we could do. One of the things I'm a big believer in is energy efficiency. The cheapest unit of energy you use is the one you don't have to use in the first place. So we have tried to supplement the oversubscribed energy efficiency funds, which are used not only to do an audit of your home to determine where you might go in more insulation, replace windows, all sorts of things, but also to pay for some of those services. And frankly, because of increased demand, there's just not enough money on the table. We've asked the Appropriations Committee to appropriate another $20 million as a one-time only from the general fund to meet this immediate need. This is great because not only will it be money available for energy efficiency, these are long-term solutions. They really save you money over the long haul. They're really excellent investments. And I encourage everybody to look into what works best for their particular home. And we need to do more with landlords as well for rental properties where the tenant doesn't have the ability to do these things themselves. We've also looked at ways in which we can help hardship consumers, low-income consumers who may be disproportionately impacted by these increases by supplementing the federal dollars we get from the LIHEAP program as well as Operation Fuel and SEEP. These are all programs that, if you're eligible, can mitigate the costs. And also, we have talked about, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen, extending the turn-off moratorium such that people will not find themselves without electricity during difficult parts of the year. It's not as big a deal most times. If you're around in April on a day when it's going to touch 80 degrees, you're starting to realize how important having good ventilation and air conditioning can be for you. Beyond that, there are a number of things that we've looked at, perhaps to create greater flexibility for the utilities and the purchase of energy. Not that necessarily would have solved this problem. And we're very open-minded as to ways in which we can make it easier for consumers to make choice. And we eventually get smart meters in everybody's homes, which I hope AARP supports. We will be able to do demand response, and people will have more control over their ability to run utilities or charge their cars or do whatever at the most cost advantageous time for them. But we're still a couple of years away from that.
We've done a lot of outreach over the years promoting home energy audits. We think it's great. Before we started promoting that, both Mike Boston or Duncan, State Director, and myself went out and got home energy audits and found them to be immensely helpful to, figuring out ways to conserve, as you said, the best thing, if energy you don't use is the best investment. And so we really appreciate that. Where do people go to find out about energy efficiency programs and things that might be available to them?
I and other colleagues have been going out of our way to hold little town halls with constituents to talk exactly about this, not only about the programs that are available, but to direct them to a site called energizect.com, where consumers can go right here in the state of Connecticut and look at all their options. How do you get an audit? How do you take advantage of a variety of energy efficiency services? And equally important, the ability to look for third-party suppliers who maybe are offering a lower rate right now than the standard service rate that the utilities are offering. I myself, who have been with Eversource for many, many years, chose to go with a third-party supplier just to reduce my costs in the near term. The good news is the legislature has worked very hard in partnership with AARP to stamp out the fly-by-nighters, the bad actors in the third-party marketplace, and to assure that if people want to go back to the standard rate, that they can do so without penalty fairly quickly. It does take maybe a month plus to sign up for a third-party provider to see the benefit, but that's an option people should know about, even as rates probably are going down on July 1st.
That's important to know. And we often encourage representative folks to, you mentioned energizect.com, to actually type that out in their browser and not Google it, because you get a lot of these knockoff sites. If you kind of just Google it, all the advertisements come up first. But we do encourage folks to go to energizect.com to find out about a third-party supplier and whether or not that's an option that might be right for you or not, to find out about home energy audits, energy efficiency programs, solar. That's your place to go, folks, energizect.com. So we appreciate that. Very, very helpful, important information. So I know that the legislature, after that big superstorm Isaias a couple of years ago, passed a very important piece of legislation. You were on the Energy and Technology Committee. AARP supported the bill titled the Take Back Our Grid Act. So why don't you tell us about some of the important things that were in the Take Back Our Grid Act and how they're going to be helping folks currently, and how moving down the road here, they're going to be helping us a little bit more on the distribution side of electricity and such.
Again, everything energy related, John, gets a little complicated. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Yes. We talked earlier about the issue we had to face with regard to the energy transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Well, we're in a transition with our infrastructure as well. Our grid is kind of antiquated. It really doesn't have the kind of technology built in with transformers or even the wires to handle the grid of the future, where energy is going to be flowing both ways. People will be generating it on their homes with solar. They'll be charging their cars and the like. We need to make huge investments in infrastructure in order to meet the future need. And thankfully, there are a lot of federal dollars on the table now, which will facilitate some of those activities. Thanks to Pura, they've been doing a deep dive on what we need to do to upgrade the grid and make it part of a broader regional transmission network that will allow us to bring on offshore wind and hydropower from Quebec and take advantage of more and more solar by adding interconnection points. All these things are critically important if we have real partners in the utilities. And frankly, as we've seen with every storm, they've cut some corners,
Right.
and we've all paid the price for that, for extended outages, real issues with resilience, which is a large part of what the grid is supposed to do for us, but also failing to make investments in smart meters, in smarter transformers. They're starting to do it now only because Pura slapped their wrist. And a lot of people immediately blame Pura during the storms for not doing more. Well, they didn't have the tools.
Right.
And that's what inspired the Take Back Our Grid Act, which we passed about a year and a half ago, which was an acknowledged first step in doing two things. One is really holding the utilities accountable, making sure that they're transparent, that they're only being compensated for things for which they should be compensated and not making profit on it. And also acknowledging to a large degree that they need to be more performance based, as we put it. And there are models in other states as well, which is we will incentivize you, we will offer you profit, but only for doing the right things, not just for showing up for work. So that's what Take Back Our Grid was. It gave Pura more teeth to pursue enforcement actions. It sort of lifted the hood on the car so we could more easily see how the utilities are spending their money, hopefully not on huge CEO compensation. And frankly, we're working on phase two right now, Senate Bill 7. Some have described as Take Back the Grid 2, again, affording more power and oversight to Pura. Also, acknowledging there are certain areas in which the utilities will no longer be able to make profit. Some costs of doing business, they will get the cost of doing business, but no more than that. And as you can imagine, taken in combination, these two bills should over time have a positive impact for ratepayers, should lower their rates.
Absolutely, and we're strong supporters of Senate Bill 7, Take Back Our Grid 2.0. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out in the Take Back Our Grid Act that two of the things that we thought were so great were this reimbursement from the utilities for food and medicine after outages of a certain, I think, 3 days, as well as the low income rate that will be going into effect. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Pura said in the fall they're going to start enrolling people for the low income rate if they're eligible, and it'll go into effect in 2024. So those are some really great things, and we appreciate that work that you guys are doing, holding the utilities accountable. Like I said, when we think they need to be held accountable, we think we should go after them, and we think you guys are on the right track there. So we appreciate that work. So we talked a lot about energy. You do other work in the legislature. So, what are some of the other priorities that you have either on the Energy Committee or just in general in the General Assembly, maybe on your other committees that you think might be important?
Yeah, thank you for that. Just one more thing on energy.
Yeah,
I've always been a big fan of solar, and I feel that the state has lost a little momentum. When we passed the landmark legislation, gee, John, going back 12 years now, Public
yeah,
Act 80, my first term in the legislature, we initiated some tremendous momentum on solar, which has dissipated a little bit. I have adopted the phrase of the hot sauce company. We should put this on everything. I want to put solar everywhere we can. I'm trying to
sure.
encourage solar canopies, more in commercial buildings, sort of restart our residential program, get more people involved, because it's the one renewable energy we control. Well, yes, it's intermittent, but we're dealing with some of those issues with improved storage. But it's something I'd like to see happen more in Connecticut. And I'm working on a bill. It's kind of tinkering on the edges this year as we work to longer solutions that will probably take a year or two as we take a fresh look at the SCEF program we put in place a couple of years ago. On other committees, as some people may be aware, I've been probably the chief proponent of the medical aid and dying bill that is actually passed out of public health for 3 straight years and is due for a vote, I believe, on Tuesday in the Judiciary Committee, where it's died the past 2 years, which is unfortunate. I fully respect the religious beliefs of my colleagues, but the vast majority of people here in the state of Connecticut would like to have the option to end their life when they have a terminal illness on their own terms and make their own choices. And it's disappointing to me that it's possible, if not likely, that once again the religious minority is going to kill that bill of judiciary. I think every senior is perhaps a little bit more attuned to what they're going to do end of life. They should have a will and advanced directives and really do as much as they can, because who knows, what kind of shape they'll be in to make decisions end of life. You don't want to leave it necessarily on relatives or friends or even the medical community to make those calls for you. We're talking about a very small population that would like to have this choice when they have a terminal illness. It's something I care a lot about. More and more states are adopting it, and it's unfortunate that a small number of legislators are defying the will of the people here in the state of Connecticut. That's all I'll say about that. I'm still hopeful, but it's been a struggle over a good decade to try to get this legislation passed, which has had generally good results in the states that have had it for a number of years. Other things I care about, I think we all care a lot about the voting bills that are before the General Accounting and Elections Committee, General Administration of Elections. I'd like to see the early voting. I really am agnostic between 10 days or 14 days. I would like to make sure that everybody has the kind of voting machines that leave a paper trail that are reliable. I know we need to make certain investments in that. I'm generally in favor of making voting more accessible for people, whether via absentee ballot or at the polls. To me, one of the greatest freedoms we have is the freedom and the responsibility to vote in every election. Most people need to remember there's an election every year, if not more than one every year, and they need to get out and vote. So this is something that I emphasize. Frankly, seniors are the most reliable voters we have. They fully appreciate the franchise and how important it is to express their opinion, not just for their own benefit, but for every generation.
Right.
We need to get the young people to care more.
Well, yeah, that's so true. And I always tell the story, when I turned 18, my father actually drove up to the Ansonia High School, picked me up, brought me first to the post office to register for selective service, and then next door to the town hall to register me to vote. And I don't know that people do that anymore, but it certainly was an important thing. And our members, as you say, are an important voting bloc. They show up, and we strongly supported all those expansions on voting in Connecticut, including the in-person early voting that I hope will be implemented this year, and the no excuse absentee balloting, all important things, and appreciate your leadership on all those issues. So before we wrap it up, just one last thing. We have a lot of AARP volunteers who kind of work with us, so they get to know how the legislature works, and they testify before the General Assembly and know how to contact their legislators. But why don't you tell us some of the ways the public and people that are watching can find out about how to stay informed about the work of the General Assembly and how they can participate in the process, both during session and not in session. So so they can be a part of the process.
Well, I think the world has changed thanks to the pandemic, for better, for worse. But some of the positives for us is I think we've made it easier for the average citizen to participate. It used to be you have to trundle up to Hartford and wait hours and hours for your 3 minutes of fame. And that's really a hardship on a lot of people with jobs or with families. We saw a lot of people with small kids, and I can only imagine what it's like when we have a bill that might run. We've had bills in public health that have had 24-hour hearings.
Yes.
It's a long time to wait for 3 minutes. But at least now, with the hybrid approach that we've taken with public hearings, you can actually testify via Zoom. And I think a lot of people have taken advantage of that. That, and in combination with a lot of our hearings being broadcast on CTN, but also via YouTube, it's made our hearings more accessible. They may be boring, but if you choose to watch, those are options you have. As far as beyond that, there are some great vehicles out there. CT Mirror is one of my go-tos as a resource with professional journalists who cover the stories. Connecticut News Junkie is another great way to find out what's going on in Hartford. There's the Capitol Report, which is an aggregator of a lot of interesting articles from a variety of sources. So there's really no excuse for not staying informed. It shouldn't be. It's way in distant Hartford, and nobody knows what they're doing up there. Well, if you care about lawmaking and the laws that will affect you, there are ways in which you can stay involved. I and my Westport colleagues are doing a town hall in Westport next week, so we can talk to consumers about what's interesting to them, but also to inform them about what's going on. We legislators all take advantage to a greater or lesser degree with social media and email blasts. I'm backing away from some social media because I find it problematic. Um, but there are a variety of ways in which we reach out in ways we can to make sure we're aware of what consumers are most concerned about. And obviously, reach out. We may not respond to every one of the cookie cutter, chain mail emails we get on the top. But if you send us something that has a personal story, that has data that we were not aware of, we really appreciate hearing from you. And I want to encourage everybody to take advantage. I offer people my cell phone number, 203-722-7477. It's not that I'm lonely, but people don't call very often. I'm always glad to engage, even if I can't get back to you immediately, to find out what's on your mind, particularly if you have concerns that Hartford can address.
Well, Representative, I certainly appreciate you being with us today and your all the advocacy and work that you do on behalf of not only your constituents in Westport, but across the state of Connecticut. And I know our volunteers and members really do appreciate it. And I do appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule to do this with us today. Anything you want to say, last parting words to the folks?
Well, as I have become somebody who should be in AARP, your needs are very foremost in my mind. I'm mulling what happens after the legislature, the dreaded retirement word. I think as a baby boomer, we're all very attuned to the status of Social Security, of our investments, the values of our homes. This is something that's going to remain very central to me as well. Our seniors have played the game by the rules, and they deserve to be treated well and respectfully and fairly as we go forward. And I really do believe that virtually all of us in the legislature feel that way about it. And I just want to thank you, John, for your advocacy. You keep us honest, you keep us focused. We always know what's in the best interest of seniors, and that's really important to us. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that, Representative Steinberg. And folks, once again, our guest was Representative Jonathan Steinberg, and we appreciate he and all of you joining us this morning for our edition of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. Until we meet again, thank you for joining us.